Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Si je peux vous demander de prendre vos places, s'il vous plaît. If everyone could take their seats. Thank you. We're going to get started. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. My name is Karina Gould. I am the leader of the government in the House of Commons and a member of Parliament for Burlington, Ontario. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui pour cette annonce importante. Thank you for joining us today for this important announcement. I want to take time to acknowledge the presence of the Honourable Minister Kamal Khera, Canada's Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities, the Honourable Yara Sachs, Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health, Parliamentary Secretary Pam Damoff, on behalf of the Honourable Melanie Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, former Special Envoy on Combating Antisemitism and Holocaust Preservation, Professor Irwin Cotler, Ms. Deborah Lyons, and Mr. Richard Marceau, a representative for the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And I would like to acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues who are here in the audience. If you could just please stand and wave so everyone sees you. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. Today's announcement holds particular significance as, like members of our community, all Canadians and the rest of the world, we have witnessed the large-scale and brutal attacks by Hamas against Israel and are deeply concerned about the dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. And for many of us, this might be the first time that we're gathering together since last week's horrific terrorist attack in Israel. And so I just want to begin by sharing my condolences, because too many of us have family and friends that have been impacted, perhaps that we have lost in the region. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the pain and the hurt that so many of us are feeling right now. You know, Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism is more important today than it has been in a very long time. We've seen some of the really awful anti-Semitic comments that have been made, particularly over the past week, and it just reminds us all of why this is so important. And when we talk about fighting anti-Semitism, it's because we know how impactful this can be, but we also know that anti-Semitism is a gateway to hate in general. And when you come for one community, you come for all communities. Many of you know that I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. My grandfather was from Žatec in Czech Republic. He was sent to Theresienstadt, just outside of Prague, and then off to Dachau, and then Auschwitz-Birkenau. Miraculously, he survived, him and his brother. Everybody else in our family perished in the Holocaust. And when we think about why we need to preserve this, why we need to preserve this memory, why we need to talk about this, is because 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Millions of others were murdered in the Holocaust. And we see what happens when someone can look at someone and say, you are lesser than human. When your humanity is not reflected back, the awful things that people can do. And the words of never again resonate so strongly with all of us here today. And it's why our government is so committed to preserving the memory and the truth of the Holocaust and combating anti-Semitism. Canada's appointment of its new Special Envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism reiterates our steadfast commitment to fighting anti-Semitism and preserving Holocaust remembrance here at home and around the world. I know that we are operating on a relatively tight schedule today with a number of distinguished speakers that we want to hear from. Following this, there will be a media question session, and following the media question period, there will be a group photo. I will now hand over the floor to Minister Kamal Khera, who will deliver remarks to start today's important announcement. As the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities, Minister Khera plays a central role in our government's whole-of-government approach to combat hatred, discrimination, and racism in all its forms. I know she always has the right words to remind us of the importance of conquering division with unity and to celebrate our diversity, as there is far more that unites us than divides us. Minister Khera.
Thank you, Karina, for that kind introduction, and thank you for being here and for your relentless voice for Canada's Jewish community. Thank you. I think it goes without saying that these past few weeks have been incredibly difficult for the Jewish community. I've heard from many friends, colleagues, neighbors, just how incredibly hurt and anxious people feel. It seems everyone knows someone that has been directly impacted. No words can describe the immense loss that has happened. And I too would want to take a moment to offer everyone here my deepest condolences and take a moment right now to respect and honor the innocents' lives lost. The shockwaves from Hamas's brutal terrorist attacks have been felt in Jewish communities throughout Israel, Canada, and the entire world. I wholeheartedly condemn these attacks and grieve for the innocent Israeli and Palestinian lives lost and the damage that this has done to years and years of hard-earned trust between people. And right now, we're also deeply concerned about the ever-evolving humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Here in Canada, we have once again been reminded that anti-Semitism and Holocaust denialism continue to be an unacceptable daily reality facing far too many Jewish Canadians. And I want you to know that we will always stand up in the face of hatred and intolerance. Our government will always stand shoulder to shoulder with Jewish Canadians in the fight against anti-Semitism, both here at home and around the world. You know, I always say that diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice. And it is that choice, the choice of appreciating our differences rather than being afraid of them, is what lies at the heart of what it means to be a Canadian. It is a choice we must actively make every single day. And as I look around the room, I know it is a choice that everyone is making right now by being here and trying to have these very difficult and discussing these tough challenges ahead. We are choosing to stand up against Holocaust denialism. We're choosing to stand up in the face of hatred. We're choosing to stand up in the face of intolerance. And we must always choose to unite around our differences rather than let them divide us. This is an incredibly brave thing to do, because when we come together and when we lean on each other, especially when the times are toughest, this is when we bring out the best in each other. And I want to thank you all for being here for each other, trying to work towards a better future for all Canadians. So we will keep fighting anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, discrimination, racism, and injustice wherever and whenever we see it. And today, I'm extremely proud to announce that we are continuing that fight by appointing Canada's new special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, former Ambassador Ms. Deborah Lyons. Ms. Lyons, thank you for taking on this very big challenge during this extremely critical time. I have no doubt that you will make us all very proud as a special envoy. And I know I speak for many of us here today that you give me and you give all of us hope. That despite times being so difficult, now there is going to be a time when things are better for everyone here in this room and outside these walls. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the tremendous leadership of an individual that we all know. And today is also an opportunity to thank the Honorable Professor Irwin Cotler for your unwavering and dedicated service to Canadians. As Canada's first special envoy, you have been a champion for moving critical policies forward, like doubling of Canada's contributions to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and I truly cannot wait to see how Deborah will build on the many accomplishments in this role. So thank you. On behalf of all Canadians from coast to coast to coast, let me once again say thank you to these both incredible Canadians that we're so proud to have here with us today. You both remind me, personally I will say, of our uniquely Canadian values of empathy, of compassion, of inclusivity, that will not only get us through these difficult times, but in the end, make us stronger. Because I fundamentally believe that there is more that unites us than divides us. So let us lean on each other and support each other through these challenging times. Every Canadian deserves to feel safe in their homes, on the streets, to feel safe in their places of worship, and safe to be who they are. And our government will always be here to support you every step of the way. And I'm hopeful that as we move forward from here today, that we will have the courage to continue to rise above our differences, to come together and to build a better, more resilient society, one that is free from antisemitism and all forms of discrimination and hatred. Once again, I want to congratulate Deborah on your appointment. Thank you so much for taking on this incredible challenge. Thank you. Merci. And I will now pass the mic on to our incredible colleague, Minister Sachs.
Good morning, everyone. Shalom, bonjour. It's really an honor and a privilege to be joining all of you today and the many members and leaders and allies who are here with us to support our Jewish communities from across Canada. And there are many of you in the room, and for that we are grateful. I'll start with a personal thought. This past December in Israel with my daughters, my 15-year-old made the observation as we drove towards my father's home that every building along the way housed family after family that was Jewish. I nodded silently yes, with the realization that my children, who had been raised primarily here in Canada in the diaspora, that their experience with who they were as young Jewish teens was profoundly different than my own childhood. Growing up in a small farming community, or known as a moshav in Israel, I never questioned my identity, whether or not to hide it, if the school schedule would accommodate the Jewish holiday calendar, or if sharing that identity would be on a need-to-know basis only. My now 18-year-old on campus shared with me this week that she hides her Star of David necklace, gifted to her after completing her Shnat Shirut, or national service, this past year, when she gets on the metro to go to school. The heartbreak as a parent, and also the fear, is something that is at times all-consuming. Being Israeli and Jewish, for me, was simply to be. I have lived with that certainty of center my entire life, and that has truly been a gift. Last Saturday morning, that certainty was shattered. Lives lost in horrific violence and terrorism, families and communities torn apart and left in ashes. The shock has left us grieving, hearts broken, and a deep fear that is as old as time for Jewish communities in Israel and around the globe. In the wake of Hamas's large-scale terrorist attacks against Israel, the world was again reminded that anti-Semitism is not a relic of the past. It is a daily reality experienced by Jewish communities here in Canada and around the world. But I'm not without hope, because I know that we have allies. As the Prime Minister has stated time and again, anti-Semitism is not a problem for the Jewish community to confront alone. In the wake of those who glorify and celebrate these horrific acts of terror, we have been unequivocally clear that such hate has no place in Canada. And we all have an obligation to speak up against it wherever and whenever it occurs. And that is our commitment to everyone on this stage, amongst colleagues and communities. We have friends here, friends. The rising anti-Semitism is rarely the lone sign of hate or the last expression of intolerance in societies. We know that. And every community has a right to feel safe and included in the promise of Canada. And every community needs allies. This has been a time where the Jewish community has needed allies more than ever before, and is grateful for that allyship of the Government of Canada and so many who are in this room at this difficult moment. And personal aside, there are many of you who have texted me during this time, and I'll sneak in to say thank you. In the words of Holocaust survivor and psychotherapist Viktor Frankl, forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. As Minister Khera said, diversity is a fact in this country. We choose inclusivity each and every day. And while the events of this past week have been traumatic, it reinforces our why we need the role of a special envoy for preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. And we are so happy that it is you, Deb. This role is so important because it will help us deepen the relationship with our allies and to build the bridges with them that we need to educate, to advocate, to support, and yes, also to heal. Through the work of the Special Envoy and our collective communities, we will build the Canada and society that we value most, one that includes and embraces all of us. I want to thank Irwin Cotler for his dedication to this important role. You've been such a great teacher and mentor to myself and so many others in this room and across Canada. I'm looking forward to this important work continuing with our new Special Envoy, Deborah Lyons. Thank you, everyone. I will now pass the mic to my colleague, Pam Damoff, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thanks again.
Bonjour, merci de votre présence aujourd'hui. It goes without saying that this past week has been a difficult one for Jewish communities here in Canada and around the world, as my colleagues have already mentioned, following the brutal terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel. Innocent civilians are being targeted, and it's unacceptable, and the violence must stop. I know many people here today know someone who has suffered a loss, and my heart goes out to you. I'm honored to be here today on behalf of Minister Melanie Joly, who is returning from her trip to the region. Over the weekend, she's been working nonstop to oversee Canada's response, to coordinate with her counterparts, and to help de-escalate the crisis. With today's announcement, our government is renewing our commitment to one of our most important responsibilities: remembering the millions of people who were brutally murdered, honoring the heroism of those who survived, and ensuring that by fighting anti-Semitism and hate in all their forms, such an atrocity never happens again. Perhaps no Canadian has contributed more to this important work than Professor Irwin Cotler, who has served tirelessly as our first special envoy since his appointment in 2020. On behalf of Canada, I thank Professor Cotler for his service and his dedication. And I'm absolutely thrilled that he was able to join us here today to welcome his successor, former Ambassador Deborah Lyons. I have no doubt that Ambassador Lyons will undertake this role with confidence, integrity, and energy. She's served Canada for more than a quarter century with dedication and distinction, including as Deputy Ambassador to the United States, Ambassador to Afghanistan, and most recently, Ambassador to Israel, just to name a few. And in each of these roles, she's demonstrated a deep commitment to the values that we as Canadians hold dear. This new role she's undertaking is unique. It will be challenging and at times difficult, especially at such a critical moment. She will lead Canada's engagement with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and work to strengthen global efforts to fight the scourge of anti-Semitism. Jewish communities, both here and at home around the world, are facing an unacceptable rise in anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism and the conspiracy theories that often accompany it threaten our world. They erode trust in our institutions and in each other, the very glue that holds our society together. Our government is extremely concerned by the alarming anti-Semitism as well as Holocaust distortion and denial that exists both online and offline. We know all too well that this can lead to violence. And let me be clear, no person or group should ever be subject to hatred, discrimination, or prejudice. At every level, Canada will work with partners around the world to educate everyone on the true horrors of the Holocaust, to remember, to combat hate, and to share the lessons of the past. Every one of us has the responsibility to challenge anti-Semitism, racism, and hate, wherever and whenever they occur. I'm reassured that with our new special envoy, Deborah Lyons, Canadians have an unwavering ally in our efforts to do just that. Merci, Deborah, d'avoir accepté ce rôle, and I will now turn it over to Professor Irwin Cotler. Thank you.
Thank you all for your kind words this morning. Je suis très heureux d'être ici et de participer dans la cause commune qui nous rassemble, la lutte contre la haine, contre le racisme, contre l'antisémitisme, contre les atrocités de masse. Et de cette lutte, comme la lutte pour nous-mêmes, parce que de ce que nous disons et de ce que nous faisons, and what we say, and more importantly, in what we do, we make a statement about ourselves as a people. We make a statement about ourselves as people. I'm delighted, therefore, that my successor in this compelling role at this compelling time is Ambassador Deborah Lyons. I have to tell you, when I came in, Harry Orbach-Miller said to me, well, I guess you're glad that your one-year appointment is now over after 3 years. And I could not be happier because I've been trying for 18 months to have Deborah Lyons take. She is the best person not only to succeed me, but the best person to be in this role, to be in this position of leadership, the right person in the right place at the right time, who brings, and I speak here from first-hand witness testimony, who brings a unique repository of both experience and expertise in her role, who has not only been the supreme diplomat, whether it be as Canadian ambassador to Israel, the UN representative in Afghanistan, but she's been on the front lines. She has seen up close what mass atrocity is all about in Afghanistan and the like. She has that kind of interpersonal skills that will not only make people want to work with her, but that will mobilize alongside her. So welcome, Deborah. It is an absolute pleasure to know that not only that you're succeeding me, but that I'll have the opportunity to be able to work with you in common cause on behalf of all of us here. So thank you. We meet today really at an important historical and inflection moment. Minister Khera put it well when she said, you know, there are really no words. We meet in the shadow of October 7th, one of the worst days, if not the worst days in Jewish history since the Holocaust. And I don't use these words lightly or easily. A day of mass atrocity whose scale and scope of pure evil, as US President Biden called it, is almost unfathomable. A day of mass atrocity anchored in anti-Semitism, the oldest, longest, most enduring, most toxic, and as we have seen, most lethal of hatreds. For Hamas is not only a terrorist organization. That would be bad enough. It is an anti-Semitic, genocidal terrorist organization, not because I say so, but because they proudly proclaim it in their own founding charter in 1988, which publicly calls for the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews wherever they may be, and who have continued to proclaim it all these years until it finally metastasized in the mass atrocities of October 7th. As it happens, I was in Jerusalem on that fateful day, Saturday, October 7th. My family and I were in Israel to celebrate the wedding of our son, which had taken place a week earlier. And that Saturday, October 7th, as we awakened, was supposed to be a particularly festive Jewish Sabbath. It was the last day of Sukkot, which is a unique Jewish holiday, a Jewish Thanksgiving, a holiday that commemorates the forging of the Jewish people after the Exodus from Egypt, and also a holiday that commemorates our common humanity, our mutual obligations to each other. It also fell on the day of Simchat Torah, which translated literally means the celebration of the Bible, because on that day we read the last book of Moses and we start the reading of the first book of Moses all over again. The ritual, therefore, of the Bible reading. And the night before, on Friday night, in the same synagogue where we had celebrated my son's marriage the week before, we had a wonderful celebration on the eve of Simchat Torah. And so I awoke with my family on Saturday, October 7th, to go to the synagogue to celebrate all this. But as we were about to depart for the synagogue, the air raid sirens began to blare across Jerusalem. It foreshadowed what was to be a day of mass atrocities. Before long, we found that missiles were being launched, 500 missiles and rockets in the first few hours of Saturday, October 7th alone. We never made it to the synagogue. We were ushered into bomb shelters, the bomb shelters in our apartment. And as we huddled in those bomb shelters, the horrors began to emerge. It was as if you were witnessing mass atrocities in real time. You have to understand that my apartment in Jerusalem is only 60 miles, 70 kilometers away from where the assaults were taking place. Israel is a tiny family state. It's as if you were in Montreal, you would be hearing about mass atrocities in Senegal. That's how it was. And we were hearing about anguished cries of people who were suddenly being attacked and there was nobody there to protect them, calling for help. No one could understand how this was happening until it began to unfold that this was a multi-pronged attack, air, sea, land attack by Hamas, a criminal act of aggression which is going to find expression in mass atrocities. And the mass atrocities began. By the end of that day, we were told that there were 350 dead and some 800 wounded. That alone was multiple 9/11s. But as we meet today, the numbers dead are close to 1,500. The numbers wounded and maimed are more than 3,500. The hostages are more than 30. And I don't want to deal in abstract statistics. Behind every number is a suffering family. And because Israel is a family state, is a suffering people. And when we speak of Hamas, it's not only a threat to the Jewish people. Tragically, it's a threat also to the Palestinian people. It's a threat to the Palestinian people over whom they have held that people hostage all these years, over whom they have engaged in mass domestic repression. And so Hamas is an enemy of the Jewish people, it's an enemy of the Palestinian people, it's an enemy of peace itself. And that's what we're up against. And regrettably, the Palestinian people end up being human shields and end up themselves being hostages to this murderous, terrorist, anti-Semitic group, letting us understand once again that while it begins with Jews, as we say, it doesn't end with Jews. And as it happened, all this took place against the backdrop of a resurgent global anti-Semitism, which we may not have been fully appreciative of, that was itself mutating and metastasizing over time. Anti-Semitism is grounded in one foundational, generic, historical trope, and that is that of the Jewish people, of Jews, of Israel as a Jew among the nations, as being the enemy of all that is good and the embodiment of all that is evil. And that's what played itself out on October 7th. And just before I left to Israel, I met with our Prime Minister and also spoke with our Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly. And I shared with them some of the principal findings of my tenure as Special Envoy. I'm going to summarize them in one-liners because they are the backdrop to everything that occurred on October 7th, and they are the challenge to everything that is facing us as we move forward. I'm going to be enumerating them in one-liners for sake of time, but realize that behind each of these one-liners is a profound finding and one of profound pain and suffering. Number one, and this was before October 7th, that we are witnessing the highest levels of anti-Semitism that we have experienced since audits of anti-Semitism began 50 years ago. Number two, we are witnessing the highest level of anti-Semitic beliefs. The number, and here we have a study from Anti-Defamation League, the number of Americans who believe 6 or more anti-Semitic tropes, that is, that the Jews control the media or control the economy, the number has doubled in the last 5 years. We are talking about millions of Americans who believe in 6 or more anti-Semitic tropes. Number 3, the internationalization of anti-Semitism. When I say that, I don't only mean the geographical internationalization of that. I mean the interconnectedness, so that when something happens in the UK, it replicates itself in Canada. I'll give you one dramatic example. Then the Hamas attacks of May 2021, which resulted in a dramatic rise here in Canada of anti-Semitism at the time. You had a convoy going through the streets of London, England, saying, "F the Jews, will rape your daughters." The next day, we had a similar convoy going through the streets of Toronto. And so you've got the globalization in that what happens in the Middle East also has its own fallout in Canada. October 7th, mass atrocities not restricted to Israel. We have seen the hateful anti-Semitic demonstrations taking place from Melbourne to Montreal, from Berlin to Toronto. The globalization of hate, the glorification of those who committed those attacks. Which leads me to the next particular finding, also a very disturbing one, that we are witnessing the highest level of anti-Semitic hate crimes ever. In the last statistical finding that has been released, Canadian Jews, 1% of the population, are the targets of 67% of religiously motivated hate crimes. Number 5, the explosive, incendiary anti-Semitism on the internet, where if you look at Twitter, now X, there are more than 10 times anti-Semitic incitements against the Jewish people than the rest of the world combined. These are horrific data, but they tell us about the nature of the particular universe that we are confronting. A 7th is the laundering of anti-Semitism under the very cover of anti-racism itself. We even found Laith Marouf, not only an anti-Semite, but somebody who was anti-Francophone, anti-Indigenous, etc., actually being the beneficiary of a grant from our anti-racism directorate here. And he is not the only one, as we have discovered. We have the laundering of anti-Semitism under universal public values, under the protective cover of the UN, under the authority of international law, under the culture of human rights, under the struggle of anti-racism. It's this metastasizing through the laundering under the foundational values that underpin our country, that underpin us internationally. And brings me to the last 2 findings, and there are more, but I want to close with these. The erosion of allyship. Groups with whom we used to work together in common cause, Jews now find themselves rather alone. I remember as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, there was a firebombing of a Jewish day school that I had attended, the Talmud Torah. And at the same time, there had been an assault on a mosque. And so I brought together the Jewish leadership and the Muslim leadership, and I said, we need to work together in common cause. And released at that point the first ever national initiative against racism and hate, and a Council on National Security that was co-chaired by a Muslim and a Jew. You know, I find that now a lot of this is being done all over again. People don't even know that we had a national initiative against racism and hate, that we had a council on national security. But at least we were working there in allyship, in common cause. Unfortunately, that is being eroded, and that is painful. And we have to return to working together because, as we've learned only too well, that while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. The most important historical finding is that anti-Semitism is toxic to democracies. It's an assault on our common humanity. It's the canary in the mineshaft of global evil. It cannot be fought, nor can it be won by Jews alone. We have to work together in common cause, because in combating anti-Semitism, we are protecting our democracy. We are protecting our individual and collective human rights. We are protecting our individual and collective human dignity, just as in combating all forms of hate, whether they be against Indigenous people, blacks, people of color, Muslim, Asian Canadians, and the like. We are protecting our common values. We give expression to Canadians as being the people of the Charter in the age of the Charter, in our commitment to human rights and human dignity. And so I'll close by saying that I actually end in an optimistic note, and I'll tell you why. Because whatever 2023 may be, whatever October 7th, 2023 was, and I experienced it up close, and the horrors of it have really embedded themselves not only in my memory, but in my being. Like many others, I lost close friends on that day, and the suffering won't go away. But whatever 2023 is, it is not 1943. There is a Jewish state today that is an antidote to Jewish powerlessness. There is a Jewish people today that is mobilized, that is engaged, that is involved. There is a non-Jewish public that has stood up and sided with the Jewish people. The leaders of the community of democracies of the G7 have all been forthright and public and condemnatory of the terrorism and anti-Semitism. I think back to 1943, when a group of rabbis wanted to speak with then President Roosevelt and wanted to alert the American people to the horrors that were unfolding in Europe at the time. The president and the leadership didn't meet with the rabbis. But now the President of the United States made speech after speech and calling out what was happening as pure evil. Where our own Prime Minister, this was not the days of none is too many. When, as my close friend and colleague Irving Abella, Professor Irving of blessed memory, said, at the end of the Second World War, it was easier to get into Canada if you were a Nazi than if you were a Jew. This was called out by our own Prime Minister, Trudeau, who joined the leaders of the community of democracies in condemning this anti-Semitic hate, saying that anti-Semitic hate has no place in the Middle East, in Canada, or elsewhere. So the leaders of the community of democracies have stood up. And that's why I take leave of the post, feeling optimistic in the longer run. Not only am I an optimist by nature, feeling optimistic because I have a wonderful successor in Ambassador Deborah Lyons, because I believe that the Canadian community will call upon those reserves, those values that underpin the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that we will demonstrate that we are not only the people of the Charter in the age of the Charter, but that we come together dans la cause commune, that we come together in common cause, that we will combat anti-Semitism with all the commitment that is mandated because we want to protect our democracy and human rights with all the commitment and engagement that is necessary. And so, as I say, 2023 is not 1943. The best of days are still to come. We will make that possible. Thank you.
Ambassador Lyons, please.
It's hard to follow Irwin Cotler today. It's hard to follow Irwin Cotler any day. What a magnificent human being. I'm Deborah Lyons, your new special envoy, following with great excitement, but also terror into the footsteps of this giant man. This is not my normal voice. I want you to know that I am also not contagious. So I am available for lots of hugs afterwards. Bonjour, chers invités distingués et collègues. It is wonderful to look around the room and see so many friends and colleagues. Avant de commencer mon discours, j'aimerais vous remercier quelques personnes clés. Évidemment, merci au ministre et vos équipes pour vos mots d'encouragement, votre soutien incroyable et votre confiance en moi. And to my very good and dear friend Irwin, it is because of him that I am here. When he first mentioned this to me as we were sitting having lunch in Jerusalem in April of 2022, I said, oh no, Irwin, I couldn't possibly take it on. It's too big, it's too incredible. And it didn't take very long before my own heart and soul convinced me that in fact this was exactly what I should be taking on. But it is because of Irwin, a giant of a Canadian. So Irwin, thank you so much. Toda Rabba. Toda Rabba for your dedication to the Jewish community across Canada, but to all communities across Canada whom you have served so incredibly well. Thank you for the incredible protection of human rights. In all corners of the world, this man has worked to protect human rights. And for setting the gold standard for this role. It is humbling to walk in your footsteps, but I know that you are going to be there whenever I need you. I also want to acknowledge, I think it's particularly important to do it these days, I want to acknowledge all Holocaust survivors, those who might be here with us in the room and all those across the country. They continue to instruct us because those brave and determined people, they came out of the darkness to build a better world. What great instruction for all of us right now. And let us never forget to pay tribute to the more than 6 million Jews and 500,000 Roma and Sinti who were murdered at the hands of Nazis. And we also remember the innumerable LGBTQ plus persons, the persons with disabilities, and political dissidents who just because of who they were and their desire to make a better world were persecuted and killed by the Nazis and their collaborators in horrific crimes against humanity. The Holocaust must be remembered. comes, as you all know, and as you have heard from the other speakers, at a most critical point in time. I could not have imagined the brutality of the Hamas attack on Israelis, nor the anti-Semitism across the globe that followed these horrific attacks, as Irwin outlined. Jews in Canada and around the world are in intense mourning, and Canadians are with you during this period of agonizing grief. After the recent events, therefore, I stand before you even more committed to preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. And know that although we might each feel alone in this pain and misery, and we might wonder about the way forward, know that there is only one pathway. As Minister Khera outlined, there is only one pathway, and that is for all Canadians to come together as Canadians in our shared humanity, as we have always done. It is our role as Canadians to stand now with our Canadian Jewish family all across our country. En même temps que nous traversons cette période si difficile, nous constations également que nous avons beaucoup de travail à faire. So much to do. Maybe so much to do that we don't even understand yet. So, what lies ahead? First and foremost, working with communities across Canada, we must and will promote and support extensive efforts on anti-Semitism education. And yes, we will visit the universities. Secondly, we will highlight the many magnificent contributions, I know these very well from my time as ambassador to Israel, the many incredible contributions of our beautiful Jewish Canadian community, those contributions that they have made and continue to make here in Canada and around the world. And we will be working very hard with the major corporations and governments everywhere to address the online anti-Semitism. We will also be stressing the need for accurate data collection for evidence-based decision-making and program. I don't want anyone to tell me that we don't have the data and that this is not real. We will have the data. And we will do all of this while making central the security of our communities to ensure that every Jewish Canadian feels safe in this country. But rest assured that we will not be alone in this effort. It is important to me and to the ministers, to the government, frankly, to all of our parliamentarians, that this work is done with the support and engagement of key communities and stakeholders right across the country and from every part of Canadian life. We must and we will act as Team Canada and not as individuals fighting distinct causes. That is not the kind of teamwork that I support and lead. So, to the faith and spiritual leaders, I say, I am relying on you. I am relying on you to bring us all together. The faith and spiritual leaders from the wide spectrum in Canada. I am relying on you to bring us all together. Now more than ever, we need you We need your spiritual guidance and leadership to gather us all as God's children. And in so doing, challenge the seeds of division and misunderstanding. To the media, I say, your role is so important in combating false narratives and promoting information integrity. Yes, we badly need you. We need you to shed light in the darkness and to hold that light high as we continue to navigate these emotionally fraught times that are laden with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, disinformation, and as we all know and have suffered from, so much hate speech. And finally, to our political leaders and elected officials at all levels across Canada, I say, guide us, unite us. Let me say that again, please. Unite us and inspire us through your actions to continue to build that diverse and inclusive Canada which all your constituents deserve. The safety and security of Canada's Jewish community is a nonpartisan issue that we can and must contribute to together. So for all of us, there is much, and always will be, much work to do. Perhaps more now than ever before, domestically and internationally. But I can tell you, from my 15 years serving abroad as a diplomat, that there is an important leadership role for Canada to play on the global stage. I've seen it. I've been asked for it by other countries. So Canada will be there. We will continue to work with the 35 member countries of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, to advance Holocaust remembrance and combat anti-Semitism. I have taken this job because of the importance of this job and because I know what Canada is and can continue to be. And I know, again, from having served abroad for so long, how many countries are looking for models of people coming together to support one another, to have that diverse and inclusive global society living in a better harmony. And so I am here as well because I know of the incredible colleagues that I'll get to work with. The wonderful Jewish organizations, CIJA, who you'll hear from shortly, B'nai B'rith, the incredible work of Simon Wiesenthal, the amazing federations right across the country. The minute I say one, I will forget two, because that's what happens at my age. But it is an amazing group of people, and we will work with so many others. I so look forward to working with my amazing colleague, Amira Al-Ghawabi, the Special Representative for Islamophobia, for working with the Anti-Racism Secretariat, working with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, this incredible, incredible mass of commitment and talent. Surely, all of these adults can come together with that goodwill and turn to our young people and say, we're going to find a way. But right now, our world is hurting. We're a little bit broken, and we are hurting. But as we make our way together through this permeating sense of helplessness, I know that as Canadians, with our wonderful leaders, we will come together. We will see the challenges, and we will face that incredible work that needs to be done. And your office of the Special Envoy will be with all of you as we struggle to go forward to much better days. Merci beaucoup à vous. Thank you all so much. It is my great honor now to introduce one of those wonderful colleagues and organizations that I mentioned earlier, who will work with all of us to help us become what Irwin Cotler has put in front of us this morning, to become the people of the Charter, the people of human rights. Working with organizations whom you'll just hear from in a few moments, we're all going to be able to do that. And I am there to work with all of you, as will be my team. So let's take the time now to embrace one another and to embrace our many communities across Canada, and know that we will get through this very dark period and take the inspiration from those incredible Holocaust survivors who showed us how deep and resilient and incredible the human spirit is. With that, I give you Richard Michaud.
Mesdames les ministres, Madame la secrétaire parlementaire, je voudrais commencer en m'excusant auprès de vous parce que, alors que je voulais écouter ce que vous disiez et porter toute votre attention, je textais avec mon fils Olivier qui revenait d'une funéraille en Israël et il a dû se coucher par terre parce qu'il y avait des attaques de missiles. Alors vous comprendrez que je voulais savoir ce qui se passait avec lui. Madame l'ambassadrice Deborah, nous de CIJA sommes évidemment ravis de votre nomination et nous vous connaissons depuis longtemps. Nous connaissons votre énergie, votre talent et votre dynamisme. And we know your energy, your drive, and you know the need for all of us to stay human and to stay connected to our humanity. All that you have, all that you are, will be needed. You're taking this position in a very, very dark period. As Jews in Israel are attacked by a group who committed and continues to commit atrocities against civilians and launching rockets in Israel against villages, towns, and cities. I was saying in French earlier that my son is there and he just came back from a funeral, and as he was coming back from a funeral, he had to lie down because he was under attack. There were missiles falling all around. But it's not only in Israel, in Canada too. Canada Jews in 2023 are scared. They're wondering if their kids should go to school. They're texting, parents texting each other, should I let my son go play with your daughter? Mothers, including ministers, are wondering, I have daughters who wonder or are hiding their Jewish stars in the subway in Canada in 2023. There are demonstrations celebrating what happened. I see Anthony here, and he knows that in Montreal, people were throwing candies to celebrate the atrocities in Israel. Irwin mentioned that 2023 is not 1943 because the State of Israel exists, and he's right. But 2023 is not 1943 because we have political leaders in Canada that denounce this hate. Prime Minister Trudeau, Conservative leader Poilievre, Bloc leader Blanchette, NDP leader Singh, all of them, not to mention, of course, premiers and ministers and everybody, There's unanimity in standing in solidarity with the Jewish people, and that is also a big difference from 80 years ago. But we Jews see and hear what's going on in our streets. We know they are here. This hatred must be combated, and we're very pleased with Deborah's appointment to this position. But the people who are spreading hate in our streets and online should face consequences, being legal, being professional, or being personal. They should be shamed for what they're doing and for what they're saying. Deborah, you understand the centrality of Israel. You've been posted there. The centrality of Israel, the Jewish state for Canadian Jews, and for the identity of Canadian Jews. You understand, that understanding is precious. You know, and we know the value we attach to partnerships and working with people of different faith and ethnic groups, and that will be central to what you'll be doing. So I extend the organized committee's hand to you. We will work with you. We will work with the government. We will work with the opposition. We will work with people in the academy. We will work with unions. We will work with everybody, because this is a fight that is not a Jewish fight, but it is a Canadian fight. And together, we will fight Jew hatred, and we will make a Canada that's better for Jews, and a Canada that's better for Jews is a Canada that's better for Muslims, that's better for Sikhs, it's better for Hindus, it's better for LGBTQ2 people, it's better for people of color. A Canada that's safer and better for Jews is a Canada that is better for all of us, and that is what we must strive for. Thank you very much.
Merci Richard pour vos mots et merci à CIJA pour être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Tant que les autres organisations, je sais que B'nai B'rith et les amis de Système Wiesenthal sont ici aussi. Could you please join me in one more round of applause in thanking outgoing Special Envoy Irwin Cotler and welcoming incoming Special Envoy Deborah Lyons. I think today's event highlighted why this position is so important. All of the speakers did a tremendous job explaining why we must defeat the scourge of anti-Semitism, why we must preserve and reinforce Holocaust remembrance. I want to thank Special Envoy Deborah Lyons for pointing to Holocaust survivors. It made me think of my own family, who survived the greatest evil that could have ever passed, and yet came here and built a life for themselves. And when I think about my grandmother, who would never have called herself a Holocaust survivor because she escaped to England for the war, when she learned that I was an elected member of Parliament, she thought, we came here to this country with nothing. We left everything behind. We lost so many in our family. And here we have a granddaughter who is serving the Canadian people and building that vision of inclusion that Mr. Cotler spoke about so beautifully, about what's possible in this country. And so I hope that while we are in a dark chapter and while the events of the past week have hurt us all so profoundly, we leave here with that sense of optimism that so many of you spoke about what the possibility of Canada represents for all of us in that diversity and the choice that we have for inclusion. And so we are going to take some questions from the media in a moment, but some of my colleagues have to get to the House of Commons for House duty, and as the government House leader, I need to make sure they get there. So we're going to take a quick photo first, and then we'll open it up to questions from the media. So. Thank you. So I will now invite Laurent de Casanova to open the media question session.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Laurent. I'm press secretary to Minister Khera.
Sorry, and any members who are attending the legal session, if you could make your way to room 103? Yep, okay. So thank you. And as those that are exiting, thank you so much for joining us today. Merci beaucoup à vous tous pour être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Merci. Okay, Laurent?
Okay, so thank you for taking our questions. Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press. My first question is we're good for questions, right?
Yep.
Wonderful, thank you so much. My first question is for Ambassador Lyons about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Could you please provide a clear example of an acceptable criticism of Israel and an example of what's not acceptable that we've been hearing in the past week or so, and if you feel like this is a clear definition?
Here? Yes, yeah. Well, thank you very much for that question, and certainly it's an issue that has received a great deal of attention. I think that, again, the distinction has to be made that what is happening in Israel, what is happening with Gaza right now, what is happening in the Middle East is something that is of great concern to everyone, obviously. The purpose of the anti-Semitism definition is very clear, and the definition itself is clear. The examples within the definition are the ones are what has received the most amount of, I think, debate and discussion amongst people. I think basically what we're trying to say at this stage, and I'm going to ask Irwin to speak to this as well, because he's had much longer discussions and debate on this with people over the last year, and as part of his representation at IRA, is that it is fine to criticize any country, to criticize, frankly, any government. But when it is something that is being done over and over and over and over as a singular target without really the context of comparing or examining in comparison with other countries, it becomes an example of simply focusing on that country through an anti-Semitic lens, as compared to looking at it clearly for what the conditions are and how the conditions are being played out either by the government or by the people. So I think that the examples that you have within the anti-Semitism definition right now are ones that clarify, I think, very well the situation that we're faced with, that it is fair to be critical of any government and any country. That is, of course, something that we would all respect. But when it becomes a complete and constant target without any other focus or balance with other conflicts or controversies, then it becomes very obvious that it is done from an anti-Semitic perspective. Irwin, I think you could add to that much more deeply.
Very quickly, I share everything that Deborah said, but I think we need to appreciate that the IRA working definition on anti-Semitism, which is a non-binding definition, is the most authoritative, comprehensive, and international consensus definition that we have. What is not so well known, that it was democratically adopted over a 15-year period by intergovernmental bodies, governments, parliaments, our own parliament, civil society leaders, scholars, provinces, and the like. And so it is the gold standard, as it has been called, with respect to definitions on anti-Semitism. And clearly it makes a distinction between criticism of Israel, which of course, like any other government, is not only possible but warranted. And the definition clearly states that criticism of Israel, like any other country, is not anti-Semitic. I can tell you, as somebody who's been himself quite critical of Israeli government and policy, I've appeared before the Israeli Supreme Court to challenge some of their decisions. That's not the issue. The issue is when you're engaged in what would be called the delegitimization of Israel and the Jewish people, the demonization of Israel and the Jewish people, the application clearly of double standards where the Jewish state is singled out for selective opprobrium and indictment while giving exculpatory immunity to the great human rights violators like Iran and Russia and China. And I'm speaking about UN decisions in that regard. When you have the denial of Jewish history and heritage and Jewish indigeneity to the state of Israel and so on, there is a panoply of what is identified as being anti-Semitic, but it does not include criticism of Israel, even harsh criticism of Israeli policy and practice. It's only when you engage in the singling out of demonizing, delegitimizing, double standard, what my colleague Natan Shranzi called the 3 Ds, that you're engaged in anti-Semitism.
Thank you. And a question for Ministers Gould and Khera. I also was going to ask Minister Sachs. She's no longer present here. Israel's President Isaac Herzog said last Friday of Gaza that, quote, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible because civilians, quote, they could have fought against that evil regime which took force of Gaza." And I'm wondering if you agree, and what is the government's position on whether civilians in Gaza bear collective responsibility for Hamas?
Thank you for the question. Look, our government has been extremely clear that we support Israel's right to defend itself, but we also call for the protection of civilians, both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories of Gaza and in the West Bank. We are calling for a humanitarian corridor, and we have been very, very clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, but we must do everything we can to protect civilians.
But collective responsibility, it's a yes or no. Do you agree?
So we very firmly and very clearly have stated Israel has a right to defend itself, and we must do everything we can to protect the lives of innocent civilians.
Hi, Rafi Bujukan, UNCBC News.
Sure.
This is for Ambassador Lyons or Mr. Cotler, or both, if you like. I'm wondering what you think the Canadian government needs to do to step up on criminalizing Holocaust denial, which was something they were going to do with amending the criminal code, but hasn't been done yet.
And just before I turn it over to the special envoys, I've been asked any rabbis who are participating in the next session to please make your way to room 107. Thank you. I'll turn it over to.
Ambassador Lyons recommended that I answer the question. I can just tell you that we may not appreciate that we already have in the Criminal Code of Canada, which prohibits the willful incitement of hatred and contempt against an identifiable group. We have already anti-hate legislation. Our problem is that we don't enforce the legislation. We don't effectively implement what we already have on the books. And in fact, Holocaust denial in our own Supreme Court judgments of 1990, and I participated as an intervenant in those cases, Keekstra et al., made it clear that Holocaust denial was a form of anti-Semitic hate speech that was not protected speech under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. By the way, I just want to say that those who invoke the American First Amendment doctrine sometimes even misrepresent that doctrine. Even under the American First Amendment doctrine, not all speech is protected speech. Perjury is not protected speech because of the right to a fair trial. Child pornography is not protected speech because of the rights of children. I can go on. And so here in Canada, that kind of anti-Semitic hate, Holocaust denial speech is not protected speech, both by reason of judgments of the Supreme Court and by reason also of our own criminal code legislation.
Okay, thank you. And for my follow-up, if you want to stay there, or if Ambassador Lyons, you want to join, I'm wondering what advice you have for the Canadian government when it comes to opening up the Rafah border to allow the Canadian civilians in Gaza to get through. What advice do you have to convince the government of Israel to do that?
Thank you very much. I'll take that on behalf of the government. Minister Joly has been in the region over the weekend very clearly to show the Canadian government's support for Israel, but also to advocate for a humanitarian corridor. There are many diplomatic efforts underway with Canada, but also with many other countries to facilitate the exit of foreign nationals from Gaza. Those efforts continue, and we will be continuing to press for that. Thank you.
Hi, Cormac McSweeney with City News. This question is for Ambassador Lyons and Mr. Cotler. I'm just wondering, given your impressive CVs on international diplomacy, international law, international justice, if you can weigh in on Israel's decision to cut off resources and supplies to the Gaza Strip, whether you believe, as some are suggesting, that this is a breach of international law, or do you think it's an acceptable action in response to the horrific attacks from Hamas?
I think we're going to share this question because I want to make it clear that although I know it's so tempting, and certainly when you have an amazing outgoing special envoy like Irwin, who has been both a Minister of Justice and a world-renowned figure, to ask us questions about what the Canadian government is doing vis-a-vis the incredible, disturbing situation in the Middle East right now. I want to be clear that the Office of the Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism is that, and for Holocaust remembrance is that. It does not have a geopolitical mandate in terms of addressing these kinds of issues. Obviously, we will be giving our advice from time to time, but I think the question that you're asking is truly one that should be answered by a government official, by one of the ministers. So I'll turn to Minister Gould.
Thank you very much, Special Envoy Lyons. So, as the Prime Minister has stated very clearly from the outset, Canada stands with Israel and its right to defend itself. He issued a statement on Saturday to confirm that we are very concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and that we call on all parties to ensure that international human rights law is upheld, and that is something that Canada will always advocate for. As I mentioned, Minister Joly has been in the region and is doing that diplomatic work alongside many other countries to ensure that there is as little loss to innocent civilian life as possible, either in Israel or in Gaza, and that's something that Canada will always stand for and continue to advocate for.
And because of his incredible experience with international human rights and international law, Irwin, as outgoing special envoy, would be happy to comment on the question as well.
I just want to say that when President Biden and others called out Hamas for what they were doing as being pure evil, the mass atrocities as being almost beyond vocabulary, they're almost also beyond international law conception. I can tell you from an international legal viewpoint that Hamas is in standing violation of every conceivable war crime and crimes against humanity prohibition. The very launching of 5,000 rockets are not only war crimes, but they are considered under international law crimes against humanity. The scale and scope of the mass atrocities that were committed, 270 innocent young people being murdered attending a peace festival. These are not just war crimes, these are crimes against humanity. The mutilation of babies, 40 babies in Kfar Aza alone, not only murdered but mutilated. These are not just war crimes, these are crimes against humanity. I can go on, and all this is following a criminal act of aggression in the three-pronged invasion. Having said that, the thing that I mentioned in my talk that should not be ignored is that Hamas also oppresses its own people. It also keeps the Palestinian people as hostages. It keeps them as human shields. It almost invites Israeli retaliation because it takes gleeful credit with respect to Israeli killings afterwards, if they take place, by launching its rockets from civilian areas, from civilian infrastructures. In other words, it's a double war crime, double crimes against humanity, targeting Israel, and it's not just the Jews, because Muslims get murdered also on these attacks, but targeting and keeping hostage their own people as human shields. So we have to realize that even if, and it is necessary to protect the Palestinian people in Gaza, and Israel, like any other country, has to abide by rules of international human rights and humanitarian law. At the same time, if it advises the opening of a corridor or that Gazans should move south, and then Hamas does not allow the corridor to be opened or for the Palestinians to move south, then Hamas continues to keep the Gazans, the Palestinians in Gaza, as human shields. So we have to realize, and I close with what I mentioned in my talk again, that it is a double ongoing war crime, targeting Israel and the Jewish people on the one hand, targeting its own and keeping its own Palestinian civilians hostage on the other, the whole being really enemies of peace, at the same time as they're enemies of both the Jewish people and enemies of their own Palestinian people. That's what Hamas is all about.
Thank you. And one last question.
For Special Envoy Lyons from the Winnipeg Free Press and Canadian Jewish News, as someone who's not Jewish, what will you be bringing to this role?
I so love that question. First of all, I'm not going to take the time now because you've all been sitting here for quite a while. But what I'm tempted to do is ask you for the premise of your question, like what? You think that the only person who can do this role is a Jewish person? In fact, this is Canada. We fight for one another. We advocate for one another. As the Prime Minister said, and you heard this morning from some of the ministers, we are all Canadians. We are here to support one another, particularly in these very difficult times, which is why I said I'm also very much looking forward to working with other members of other communities as we go forward in these difficult times. What I bring to this job is the commitment of a Canadian. What I bring to this job is a person who had the incredible honor to be the Canadian ambassador to Israel for almost 4 years, and to appreciate the incredible energy and drive and spirit of that country, and in so doing, work very closely with the Canadian Jewish community for almost 4 years, during also a very difficult time. And I have very close working relationships and friendships within the community. And I bring to this job, after having served abroad for almost 15 years, and looking back during those 15 years at my beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Canada, and seeing the malignancy growing here, that cancerous hate speech, that desire to polarize and divide and disrupt and destroy the spirit that is Canada. And when I left another country that I love and where I would have loved to have stayed, Afghanistan, when I left that country, I said, when I return to North America, as I look back from across the seas over that 15-year period, what most frightened me is what was happening to our country, what was happening in North America. And I recall this beautiful young Middle East diplomat, not an Israeli diplomat, sitting beside me, actually North African, sitting beside me one time during a difficult time in Israel. And we were sitting waiting for, at that time, Prime Minister Netanyahu to join us, and he said, as we talked about the state of the world, he said as his eyes teared up, "You people, you don't understand. When you start to break, when you start to collapse, when you start to lose your way, we get frightened because we look to you." And I remembered that so often as I looked home across the waves and saw things starting to happen in this incredible country that could tear us apart. And I said, no, when I come back home, I will work on one area. I will work on bringing Canadians together. And so when this incredible opportunity was offered to me, I thought, how wonderful. I feel the Jewish community in my bones, in my heart, in my soul, as I feel so many other communities in Canada. And it is an honor to be representing them and working with them. And I maintain the best answer to your question is that what I bring to this job is my Canadian spirit. Because in Canada, we look after one another.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gould, I give you back the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes this morning's event. Merci à tout le monde pour être avec nous aujourd'hui. Et encore une fois, j'aimerais remercier tout le monde qui était ici et je vous souhaite une bonne reste de journée. Merci tout le monde.